Hello everyone, I'm so grateful that you're here and I really hope you're enjoying this winter series. When we were in Idaho, my whole family was there, including one of my brothers who is very near and dear to my heart. And he and I had a very special conversation about the role that forgiveness has played in our relationship. I thought that might be something that's an encouragement to you. The setup might be a little less polished as Jonathan and I just set up our own camera. But I hope as you listen that it encourages you both in the relationships that you have now and ones going forward. Enjoy. Welcome to the winter series, and I think this is probably one of the most important topics that I think we can cover. And so many people have brought it up. Maybe it was because of the holidays and being around family, but the topic of family relationships and how difficult some family relationships can be, and the topic of forgiveness. And I thought, since my brother was visiting us in Idaho during these holidays, and that he and I can say are qualified to talk about this subject because this is a brother. So let me give you a little backstory. We are each one of six. I'm number one, he's number five. Jonathan lived with us for years after college, and we have always been incredibly close. So the topic of siblings and relationships, and I think it's also important, and I'm going to back up for 1 second because Jonathan and I were just talking ahead of this about forgiveness. It's a majorly big topic, so we're going to narrow it for our purposes. And I like the way you narrowed it.
We're going to narrow it down to relationships where where reconciliation is possible, and I would say desirable. I think there are situations of abuse and stuff where forgiveness might look different than what we're about to talk about. Mm-hmm. It may not end in reconciliation the same way we're talking about. It can still end in healing and some of the other aspects of what we will talk about, but it'll look different. And so we're going to narrow this down to where reconciliation is possible and desirable.
And I think that definitely talks about the two of us, because here we had gone through from being incredibly close most of our lives to a period of estrangement. And the reason for estrangement doesn't matter. What matters is what we learned from it and how we got to reconciliation and then how we move forward. And for me, and I can talk about myself, I think both of us would agree, there wasn't a day that went by in the time where we weren't speaking, literally where we weren't speaking, where we didn't think of each other and grieve over the loss.
Not a single day.
Not a single day. And I think, and I can speak for myself, I did not know that of him. I knew that to be true of me. I just didn't know how to fix things. I didn't know what needed to be fixed. And I
am also very much a fixer. And so my perspective was, I've got to figure this out before I go talk to Ruth and fix it. So we both kind of, assumptions can build up over time on both sides.
Not only assumptions, but resentments.
Resentments can also build up over time.
Because particularly, this conversation is dealing with family members, right? Family members, you can love the most and can hurt you the most. And oftentimes, too, when you're separated by distance, which is what we were, things had begun to chip away at the fabric of a relationship. And when you can't normalize it or walk through a time of forgiveness and what that looks like, it grows into something that is, you feel it's insurmountable. And you don't even know why it's insurmountable. Somebody could ask you what happened and you have absolutely no idea, and which is so horrible too. So, not to belabor what happened between us, but a year ago, my brother, I invited him to come to our place in Idaho. And we sat in this very room and had probably one of the most beautiful conversations and time of reconciliation. And I thought it was important to share it because I know there are so many people, whether it's between siblings or children and parents, where time has passed or assumptions are made or perceptions are wrong. And I had to approach this conversation. I had to lay down, and you need to understand my personality, and maybe it's the lawyer in me, but I can lay out a case, right? All the facts, determine that I've been right, and until the other person understands that they're wrong, we probably shouldn't have the conversation. I had to lay that down because my love for John and my desire for a relationship with him was more important than my need to be right. And what does right look like anyway? Because what I have really come to understand is that two people can see a set of circumstances or what's happened very differently. And the facts are the same. And I should have learned this being a lawyer in the court of law, right? You can have witnesses see the same set of facts and have completely different testimonies. And so it was so good for me is when we met, I'm the oldest. I mean, I'm oldest by a lot from most of my siblings. And so there can come a strength and a force with that isn't helpful in situations like this. And I know that. So we came at this conversation and I said, I'm not going to talk. I want to hear you and I want to listen, which is one of the first times I've really ever approached something with that much humility. Let me put it that way. Not that I'm not humble in things, but I had to literally be like, it doesn't even matter what I think, what I felt, how hurt I've been, how wronged I feel I've been. I wanted to hear from him. And it was, anyway, I'll let you talk about how you saw that.
Was there something else you wanted to say? It was what?
Yeah, it was probably the best way I could have ever, if I could give any counsel on approaching a relationship that has been broken, it's to approach it that way. Because it diffuses the other person's defenses. There's no need to feel defensive. They're feeling heard. Even if you might still need to have a conversation about where you're seeing things differently, it didn't make him feel like he had to defend himself or so anyway, I don't know if that approach was helpful that I did, but I knew I needed to do it as much for myself as well.
Yeah, and that was actually an approach that I also requested going into the conversation, because I had seen how much that approach had helped in other relationships of treating the conflict as an opportunity to connect, and not just work out perspectives and whose facts are right, whose facts are wrong, or who needs to ask for forgiveness or who needs to give forgiveness. We grew up in a family where that was very good at making sure you asked for it and said sorry and said, I forgive you.
Yes. Without really making the heart connection.
Yeah. Without recognizing the opportunity to connect with each other and to bring healing to each other in your own perspectives of what may have gone on. And I think that's something that I walk away from from this experience with each other with, that I'll take to, other relationships in life of treating conflict, treating those things as opportunities, not as something that is scary to be run away from, so to speak.
Yeah. Dad used to often say, when something went wrong or we did something wrong, what a great opportunity this is. Don't see it as a failure. Don't see it as loss, but it's an opportunity. And I think I hadn't viewed this kind of conflict as an opportunity before. And having walked away from it, I think that was the other thing we talked about before we left each other in that conversation, was where do we go from here? And because you live in different states and it's hard to normalize things. And I'll tell you what, and he can say how his approach to healing that went. But for me, it was healed immediately. It was like both of us forgave each other. Nobody had clean hands. I'm not talking about you did this wrong, but how we viewed it and our responses weren't the right way to handle it. And I think if I took something, and I'll ask John that, like if you took something away from how long it took for us to make the reconciliation, or would you have done anything differently, or like going forward, what would you do differently?
Done anything differently? Sure. I think the easiest example is time. Mm-hmm. When you already have distance between you, time just makes, as you were talking about earlier, it makes everything bigger. Even though you can't define why it's bigger.
It's just bigger.
It's just bigger.
It's big. Yeah.
And it makes it feel less and less surmountable. I think there's a reason you shouldn't let the sun go down on your anger generally. But I think there were other things that were happening in that interim period. So one of the other things that we talked about off camera was the reality that in these situations, especially where there's estrangement and can't necessarily pinpoint like a specific thing that someone did against you or vice versa to have caused it. But especially in those situations, the cause can be as much wounds in yourselves that have very little to do with the other person, as much as any facts of what happened. Mm-hmm. And there's a self-protective reaction that comes if those wounds are fresh and haven't been dealt with. And so in that time where we were estranged, one of the things that led to, I think, being able to successfully deal with it for both of us was both of us in our respective ways dealing with some of those things.
That were completely separate from one another.
Yeah, that allowed us to approach the conversation with each other with humility and with that desire for the other person and for connection and out of love for the other person in a way that made the reconciliation possible, because we both let go of our own stories and we gave up our right to justice, so to speak.
And we both started off the conversation literally with, I want to hear you, and number one, I love you. I remember, and I'm going to cry, but that was something we both let off in the conversation, because ultimately that mattered more than any of the rest of it. And I had gone through all my, when you have loss, what do they say, the different degrees of loss? Anger, hurt. I had gone through my period of hating him, only because that's the opposite of love, right? And the wound was so deep and the loss was so great that for me to walk through it, I went through that. So to come back and to be able to look at each other and say, I love you, before any conversation was had, was really, really important. Because specifically as talking about siblings or talking about parents and children, wounds can be deeper than in any other relationship. And it's just so important to love each other really well and to not let time pass And if you don't come at it with that humility, you're not going to be able to break through to reconciliation in a way that is healing for both of you. So I think that's one of the things I've learned through it. That's one of the things I would carry. You know, I think we're going to both talk away. If we had to give anyone counsel, number one, don't let time pass. Number two, don't let things build. I think that we can say, oh, we overlook this, or we're siblings, this happens, or no, be like, you know what, I'm hurt. You know what, I'm pretty ticked off. Whatever it is, make it right with one another. You know, we've started to have those conversations with my own kids, because you can see why when parents die, the kids don't talk. If there isn't real love between them, and what I can promise you is that you'll come out the other side with that sibling. If you've done it right and you both have desired reconciliation, you'll come out stronger than before you started. What would you leave people with if you had to?
As far as advice goes, I think there are probably a couple of aspects. So one is what you mentioned about don't let things build. The human brain is not very good at distinguishing between facts over time and stories
emotions
that come in, emotions that all build on top. So that one for sure. I think the one aspect we already talked about is the humility and the prioritization of not prioritizing the facts, prioritizing the other person's experience. Because regardless of what the facts were, their experience is what they've built their actions off of and their reactions.
And it's real to them.
And so it's that is what enables that connection. That is what enables the conflict to become a point for greater strength in the relationship. Is if you approach it that way, and that requires freedom for yourself. That requires. We were talking earlier about not needing a defense, and so
you don't feel threatened.
Yeah, so not feeling threatened. And in my case, there were some things that needed to heal in me so that I could walk into a conversation like that with a strength where no matter how it ended, no matter if I was and not to say you would have done this, but whether I was attacked or not attacked or, whatever, none of that mattered to a certain degree. Not that it wouldn't have hurt if something like that happened, but where
for the record, I didn't attack.
No. No, but I think what I'm getting at is so often conflict, and I touched on this earlier, can come from just stuff that's unresolved in us. And so the sooner you can work on that stuff, the sooner you can have conversations that put the relationship and put the other person first, in a way that's free.
And to kind of close this up, what he's done since then, which is so beautiful, is he even came a week out before Avery's wedding and spent a week just helping us prepare for it. So it's going the distance after reconciliation to normalize relationship. Because oftentimes, habits have been formed, or, ways of behaving have been formed where it's easy to slide back into patterns that aren't, healthy for going forward. And I think what John has done an incredible job is jumping back to where we are, just loving each other really well and being involved in each other's lives.
Yeah, well, and I think in the context of what we're talking about forgiveness where restoration is desirable. And so after coming back together, we had a conversation of, okay, well, what do we want our relationship to look like moving forward? We wanted reconciliation. We wanted to be in each other's lives. And so then the question is that I think is worth having as a conversation with each other is, what does that look like, and how does each of us want to invest in this and in each other, and in a way that's meaningful to the other person, not just to you. So
that's what we did, and he's been incredible. He loves my kids well, and they love him well, and I think you'll find taking care of those things, oh my gosh, your love will grow deep, deep and wide. And the fact that you've been able to do this the next time won't be what it was the first time, because you've been given tools and you understand each other in a new way. And hopefully you've learned from the way you blew it in the first place. So,
well, let me ask you one question.
Yeah.
So, do you feel like you walked, other than what we've already talked about, do you feel like you walked away from this with other tools that you didn't have before?
Oh, 100%. Again, and maybe it's being firstborn, maybe it's being trained as a lawyer, but for me, everything's been about facts. And again, we have to talk facts, have different perspectives looking at the facts. I didn't see that, because you need facts to prove a case, right? But for me, it was setting all of that aside and just saying, I don't care, whether I'm right or wrong. What I do know is he loves me and I love him, and we don't desire estrangement anymore. And so I think what I learned is, I also learned not to be afraid. I think I was afraid of rejection because it had gone on so long. And when we were mentioning earlier how things can build, I was afraid he'd reject relationship. And again, not even understanding why we were in this place to begin with. So I think I walked away with a confidence that we wouldn't let this happen again, with a confidence that my brother loved me like I loved him, and that forgiveness isn't just something you're doing for somebody else. You're doing it for yourself. And I had gone through where I had forgiven him, and then I began to actually pray blessings over him. And all of this happened before we met. But meeting someone and laying down your sword is a whole nother ballgame. And I think that was, to me, the ultimate gift to give somebody and to give myself. So I think those are the things that I learned. I think when you grow up just saying, I'm sorry, yes, I forgive you, it's very easy to say those things and not change behavior. So, yeah. So I want to thank you. I love you. And I want to thank you for your willingness to listen. And my desire for you is that you lay down that sword and you both forgive and offer forgiveness. So thank you so much. And thank you for joining our Winners today.